Sunday morning Bible class at North Tampa. We appreciate your attendance, whether you are, I was wondering if I was going to do this in the dark, or we appreciate your attendance, whether you're here in person or online with us. We're continuing our study of about the concept of commitment. Look forward to any questions and comments that you might make today. The title of the topic is the death of trust, which I think is kind of an interesting topic in today's world. But if you go back a little bit and historically look at this, in 1835, Alexis de Tocqueville, who is a French historian, philosopher, writer, wrote a lot about democracy and the democratic way of life. He reported that he found tremendous trust and a strong emphasis on personal integrity among Americans. Somebody laughed. That was in 1835. Go ahead.
You didn't have to have a legal form or anything. Your word was your bond.
Trust was a handshake, your word was your bond. That's exactly right, and that's kind of where we're going. But Jorge Prover, an anthropologist at UCLA, their School of Public Policy and Social Research, in 1998, in an article that he wrote, said, "In America there is no shame anymore." And I thought that's kind of an interesting, in 150 years, people who are writing about our culture, the view of the culture changed very, very dramatically, and it was a very negative change. And when you read more about that, oftentimes the cause that's identified as what's creating that decline is the depersonalization of our society. You don't know the people you do business with. You don't know your neighbors. You don't know the individuals that you associate with on a regular basis. In 1900, 4 out of every 10 Americans lived in what we would call urban centers. In 1998, that had increased to 7 out of 10 Americans lived in urban centers. The conclusion of that was that we've become strangers in our communities. As Glenn just said, at one point in time, business ran on a handshake. Your word was your bond. And now there's litigation, piles of lawsuits. When you get married, there's a prenuptial agreement, lots of fine print to define the relationships that you have with people. And when you look at until death do us part and the marriage vows, well, that lasts 2 or 3 years maybe. Or to tell the whole truth, unless the lawyer tells me it's going to make me look bad, and then just say something else. That to me shows that there's a loss of personal integrity in our society, in our world, this particular time. One interesting statistic I found was that in 1950, 70% of the Americans trusted their government. And now 70% of the Americans don't trust their government. Kind of a sad commentary on what's happening within our society. Trust is gone in our press, in our government, in a lot of business institutions, universities. Even confidence in religion has taken a slide. When you look at what's happened with the televangelism world, we look at what happened with the difficulties that the Catholic Church is having throughout the country. That it's a sad commentary. I saw a bumper sticker not long ago that said, "Be sincere whether you mean it or not." I thought that was kind of an interesting concept. Yes, Glenn?
Gradually, in the early days, you wouldn't see certain things. You wouldn't talk about certain things. And then gradually it came, a little bit here, a little bit there. And so seeing commercials with women advertising bras and things like that you would never have seen in the early days, but it came on slowly. Magazines would not have advertisements of certain things, and yet slowly but surely
It's like a bee that pushes the
became
boundaries.
desensitized.
We're always pushing the boundaries. Well, we just do a little more, say a little more, get by with a little more, and then that becomes the norm. And then we push the boundaries again. I want to give you 3 practical examples in the commercial world right now. So my wife says, go to the store and get a pound of bacon. Oscar Mayer has, and I like Oscar Mayer bacon. I'm not being critical of Oscar Mayer. It's good bacon. She says, go to the store and get a pound of bacon. So I go to the store and I pick up this box because there's a box there that looks just like this. It says a pound of bacon, and this one says maple thick cut bacon. I thought, hey, that sounds pretty good. Then I get home. She says, what'd you get that for? I said, well, you said get a pound of bacon. She said, well, it only has 7 slices in it, and it's actually 2.52 ounces. But it's in the same box right next to it that Oscar Mayer has that has a pound of bacon in it. I thought, well, that's ridiculous. So, she also says, get a pound of butter. So got either a pound of margarine or a pound of butter. I thought, well, that's good. And I picked up, I can't believe it's not butter. We've used can't believe it's not butter for 10 years. And so after I saw this, I started looking. And while, yes, these are a pound, this is 15 ounces. You think, well, that's just an ounce. That doesn't make any difference. But I did a little calculation. You'd appreciate my math here, I think. When you figure out how many people, you go online and find out how many people buy a container of this at least once a week, you're finding that the company, the name of the company is, I've never heard of them. Upfield is the name of the company that produces, I can't believe it's not butter. But when they reduced that, and it was, about a year ago, it was 16 ounces. Now it's 15 ounces. And when they reduced that to 15 ounces, it increased the bottom line profit for Upfield $10,603,000.31. Just by taking 1 ounce of butter. So I thought, well, this is ridiculous. And then we get to what I think is serious business, and that's ice cream. I'm going to give Publix a plug. They sell a half gallon of ice cream. But in 2008, Breyers, which is probably my favorite ice cream, and these were full, they're now empty. Breyers reduced the amount of ice cream in a container of ice cream from a half gallon to 1.5 quarts. They got a little pushback. I looked at some of the articles online about the difficulties Breyers had when they did that, but they were quickly followed by Edie's and Mayfield's and most other people. Publix still puts a half gallon of ice cream out. I'm not sure exactly why. But what did that do? That's a 25% reduction in volume, certainly less cost associated with producing that. And Unilever, which owns Breyers, added $42,845,000 to their bottom line by doing that. Now, what's my point? My point is that we get used to doing things. We get comfortable with buying products and dealing with businesses in certain ways. Then all of a sudden, without any announcement, something changes. And we get less quality, less quantity, but we're still paying the same price. Does that have anything to do with trust? I think so. Now I'm kind of getting used to the fact that I only get 4 or 5 nights instead of 6 or 7 if I buy Briars. But for a while I thought, I'm not going to buy that anymore. But then Mayfield did it, and then Edie's did it, and then Publix hasn't, but most have. Yes, Glenn?
Buy things that was built on trust. A corporation built their product and it was a great product, but then something happens later on. Once again, the dollar factor enters into it. Well, if we do this, we can make more money for the profit holders, whatever. But then your trust in that product was based on the original product.
Right,
Coca-Cola.
exactly.
Remember originally the Coca-Cola, and we're going to go from there, and then all of a sudden they wanted to change it. What a big uproar. Well, they still kept a few bottles. You could still purchase the original Coke, but then eventually it was phased out.
That's right.
But they had to adjust, according to.
Exactly. Bought new Coke, nobody bought it. I mean, they made new Coke, nobody bought it. But at least they told you it was coming. We're going to change the recipe. I didn't lose a lot of trust in Coke when they did that because they told me it was coming. I didn't see these coming. These examples. Yes, sir.
You can buy extra storage on iCloud, for very little, 99 cents for, I think, 5 meg. But look at the number of people who use that system and are likely to do that. That's money in the pocket for anybody.
Yeah. So I have a question for you. You go back and look at in history. Think of a historical figure that you really trusted. Somebody that you really trusted. And I think of the times when I was growing up. When I was a small boy, the first president I remember was Dwight Eisenhower. And I trusted President Eisenhower. He was former military commander. Both political parties wanted him to run with their flag. He ran for president 2 times, got elected. I trusted him. I think of other people. Winston Churchill, historically, a person that the world trusted. He wasn't the smoothest talking person in the world. He wasn't someone that had a lot of polish, but boy, they trusted him. Mother Teresa. I don't know a lot about her, but what I have read, those people she came in contact with throughout her ministries, people trusted her. Can you think of people in your mind that you think of right now that you trust from a national or international perspective? I don't see anybody jumping up to offer suggestions. That's kind of, and I had a tough time too. I started thinking, well, if I were to look around, there are individuals, friends that I know, that I trust, but when I think of a public figure, the world trusted Walter Cronkite when he was the commentator on CBS News in the evenings. At the end of every, he said, that's the way it is. This particular date. Everybody remember him saying that. And people trusted what he said. That trust is not there anymore. Very few situations. Sigmund Freud told us to throw away the 10 Commandments, we'd be happier. We threw them away and we weren't. Yes, Jack.
You're talking about change. The Church of Christ has changed.
Okay.
In many instances. For an example, my daughter goes to a Church of Christ in Texas. They have 2 services They have a traditional Church of Christ service, and then they have a modern Church of Christ service. Full-blown band with a lady leading, singing with the choir. So one of those has got to be wrong.
That's not the only place where that's happening.
And it's like I've told my daughter, because they're doing it there, then both of them are wrong. So it's like, I remember back in the 50s that you could look at a lady and then you could say, that's a Church of Christ lady or a Church of God lady. Very simple. Why? Because the way they dressed.
So your first comment, things have changed.
Yes.
Things have
But
changed,
you-
and
but
not
you're
always,
talking about
not always
things
for the
changing.
better.
The Church of Christ has changed.
Yeah.
And I'm not real happy with a lot of it.
Well, I will tell you that I think change is inevitable. I don't think there's a whole lot that we as human beings can do to stop change. But what we can do, and in fact, William Bridges, professor out on the West Coast several years ago, wrote a book called Transition and Change. What we can do is manage our adaptation, acceptance, rejection, response to that change. We can manage the transition that we make through change. Change happens. And I've never been so thankful as what I've seen, what Jack was referring to, is what's happened in so many congregations around the country. I've never been so thankful for the fact that God chose in His wisdom to make us autonomous congregations. That there's not some few people sitting at the top of an organization somewhere in this country said, if you're going to be called a Church of Christ, you got to do this, 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 and this. Because who knows what they would do. That's why we have elders in local congregations. That's why they make the decisions. And I think we have to choose whether or not we subscribe to what their point is. Yes, Ken.
You know, Stacy, though we lament, and rightfully so, how things were in the 50s and the 60s versus how things are now, you know, if we study who we're supposed to study in the New Testament, I doubt the New Testament Christians could think of too many people they trusted in their government, in their leadership, whether it was Rome or whether it was the Jewish leadership. You know, they couldn't trust that stuff, and you know, they had to deal with it worse than we have it in some respects, but there was a more obvious difference between right and wrong then. And I think one of our biggest problems is this: you say they've gradually, like your example, you know, you put frogs and you put other animals in boiling water, they jump out. You put them in a pot of water and turn the heat up slowly, and they all adapt to it, and they continue to adapt to it, and they never jump out, they just eventually get boiled. Yeah. And so, you know, I think our greatest challenge is realizing they knew how the Sanhedrin felt about them. They knew how the Nero felt about them. They knew that a wolf was in wolf's clothing. You know, our problem are so many of the people that propose to be Christian leaders and propose to be religious people and propose to be good people whose motives are not what they should be.
Exactly right. In many cases, you know, I think we have to occasionally have a reset. We have to say, wait a minute, we've been going down this road for a period of time. Let's think about this. You know, are we really headed in the right direction? Is that destiny the same? You know, and I know that there's all sorts, and I quote from books all the time that I've read. There's all sorts of books that we read. But if we just go back to this and what this says, what the Bible says, and have that as our standard, I mean, we can bring in some other ideas that people have said that I've done here today with the de Tocqueville and Prover and other people like that. But ultimately, going back to what the Bible says, I think is something that we have to do, because that is, you know, that's our true north. That's our direction. And we're going to get off track. All of us are. There's no one person that's perfectly conformed to everything this says in their entire life since Jesus. So we're going to get off track, but this brings us back. In Judges, the 17th chapter and the 6th verse, it seems now that every man is doing what is right in his own eyes. And I think we have a lot of that go on in our world today. So when you think about that, what does that mean to us, biblically speaking? Well, I put a whole laundry list of verses here, and if you'll allow me, I'll read through them very quickly because there's just one verse each time, but it kind of talks about, I think we need to take this concept of trust, whether you're talking about trust in a commercial entity or whether you're talking about trust that we experience as Christians, our trust in the Bible, our trust in God. I think that we've got to make that transition. We've got to talk about, what does this mean? What does this say about trust? And so let's quickly look through those. So in Psalms, the 20th chapter and the 7th verse, some trust in chariots, some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. And that could be updated to today's world. Some trust in money, some trust in governments, but we trust in the Lord our God. If you flip over to Psalms, the 31st chapter and the 14th verse, but I trust in you, O Lord. I say, you are my God. In Psalms, the 40th chapter, the 4th verse, blessed is the man who makes the Lord his trust, who does not look to the proud and those who turn aside to false gods. In Psalms, the 62nd chapter and the 8th verse, trust in him at all times, O people, pour out your hearts to him. Our God is our refuge. Psalms 125, verse 1, those who trust in the Lord are like Mount Zion, which cannot be shaken, but endures forever. Then going over to Proverbs, the 3rd chapter, the 5th verse, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. That's a tough one to do. Trusting in God and not depending upon ourselves. Isaiah, the 12th chapter, the 2nd verse, surely God is my salvation. I will trust and not be afraid. The Lord is my strength and my song. He has become my salvation. And then flipping over to the New Testament, in John, the 12th chapter and the 36th verse, put your trust in the light while you have it, so that you may become sons of light. When he has finished speaking, Jesus left and hid himself from them. And finally, in Romans, the 15th chapter and the 13th verse, may God of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in him, so that you may overflow with hope. You may overflow with hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. So I think what these verses are telling us is that trust is connected to who God is. Revelations, the 15th chapter and the 3rd verse says, just and true are your ways. As Christians, I think we have to have confidence. We have to believe, have confidence in what this says. We have to think that this is our direction. This is where we get it from. So looking at what's happening in our world today, we have to stand for a couple of things, and that's the rest of our lesson this morning is going to be looking at these two items. The first item is character. I had an individual come to and I think I mentioned this a few weeks ago. I had an individual come to me at my business several years ago and wanted me to sponsor a new program that they were going to introduce into the school system. And the program was called Character Counts. And I said, my first response was, you don't already teach that? That's a new program? Well, I was right. They didn't. They taught various things, but character wasn't one of them. Yes.
Trusting things, what we're talking about. I watch TV with my grandkids sometimes, and I'll stop the program that we're watching, and it's one geared to them. And I'll tell them, I'll stop and say, this is not teaching the right thing here. I mean, some of these are approved, you know, for their age. But like one of the things that's crept in there, and I've started seeing it a lot, is where it says the universe. The universe provided this, or the universe did this, or what they're not going to say that God did anything.
Yeah.
Okay, and so they've substituted the universe. Have you seen that in
Yes.
the program? Any of y'all that? And
I've done the same thing with my grandsons, had to turn off programs.
I stopped it and I said, I want you to understand something. You go to church and you understand that there is a God, and God is in control of the universe and all things in it. He created all things. And I said, what they're doing here is saying that the universe that was created by God is controlling what happens. So the universe did this.
Yes.
That's not true. The universe is only a mechanism of chemistry and physics, but it is not a thought.
Yeah.
And there are other things that that they're putting into television without saying it, but just you see it and it's okay, without stopping it and saying, this isn't right. That's why I like to, when the kids are at my house, I like to watch some of the old westerns and stuff, because some of those had a lot of, they had a lot of shoot 'em up, but it was usually right one, you know, and so.
And nobody ever bled.
Oh, no, you
No,
didn't,
you
you
didn't
didn't
see
see
it.
or nobody cut any arms off or anything.
Yeah, you used to have a lot of shows on television where a lot of people died, but nobody ever bled. Yes.
The word trust is, or the concept of trust is something that is not necessarily an absolute thing. You know, it's not, I either trust or I don't trust. If you take a poll, do I trust my government? Well, yeah, I trust my government. They do things they should do for the most part. What's the degree of that trust? Trust
Sure.
is something that comes in degrees. And I saw you just put a bullet point up. There's a word, I was going to say there's a word that's very closely associated with trust, and that's the word integrity. A person who we can trust is a person who has integrity. I've known very few people in my life that I could say that's a person who I believe has absolute integrity. And you might be surprised who those people are. Not necessarily my preachers or, you know, even people that I would consider members of the Lord's church.
Mm-hmm.
But it's people who act the same way regardless of the circumstances.
Yeah.
Who makes decisions based on what's right, not on what the circumstances tell us. And that's a very challenging thing because it's not always easy to have that kind of integrity that we
You're right. There's a book that some of you may have read. It's been on the bestseller list for a number of years now. Patrick Lencioni wrote it called, name of the book was The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And he looks at various things that teams have to have, and the foundational piece is trust. And he defines trust as the willingness that I have to be vulnerable with those I trust. If I am vulnerable, if I'm sharing with you issues of concern, if I'm sharing with you my shortcomings, that's exactly what we ought to be doing as Christians. If I'm sharing with you the fears, the frustrations that I have, and I'm getting support and reactions from you that helps me navigate through that, then I trust you. So why do you trust people? I think there's probably 2 reasons. One reason you trust people is because they have earned it. They have acted in a way which demonstrates that they can be trusted. There are other people that will naturally and instinctively grant you a level of trust. And unless you do something to violate that trust, it'll continue to build. But I've had numerous people tell me, I don't trust anybody. I don't trust anybody unless they earn it. Yes?
Always when you come into this, we're talking about deep things here in one's own character. And one of those things is ethics. And I read an article on ethics and I went, wow, I don't know how ethical I am. And it was in a hunting magazine, and one of those things is if your neighbor, your close neighbor, your friend, you saw him drive home and pull a deer out of the back of his truck, and it wasn't hunting season, or it wasn't, it was a doe, and it wasn't, and it was gun season, and and it was nighttime, and so you figure you put all this together, and it was probably shot illegally. Would you turn your friend in, your neighbor? So who also here is not being ethical?
Yeah.
And you look and then just go in the house, and I went, wow, I don't think I have that kind of ethics.
So I think that's the point that we're making, that if a person acts and behaves in a way which demonstrates their character, then I am more willing to be vulnerable with them. I'm willing to open up to them. I'm willing to share issues and concerns with them. If not, then we've got a divide there. Go ahead.
Go through in life, especially as a young person, is when somebody that we had placed our complete confidence in, our complete trust in, demonstrates that they're not somebody who can be completely trusted. And that could be life-changing.
Yes. It's absolutely key. Yes, ma'am.
I think from time to time, introspectively, we need to ask ourselves, do we trust ourselves? And if our conscience has been trained by those verses that you read, hopefully it'll bother us enough to straighten out anything that we're not honest about.
I mentioned several times I have two grandsons. Last night they were staying at my house until about 8 or 9 o'clock when I took them home. But the phone rang. The older teenager has a phone. And the phone rang. And he was doing something, but he went and answered the phone. It was his mom calling to check on him. And he got off the phone and said, "Oh, that was just Mom calling to check on me." And the little 9-year-old said, "Well, Zachary, don't answer it." I said, "What? What do you mean, don't answer it?" "Well, if you don't want to talk to her, don't answer it." I said, "Elijah, I gave that phone to Zachary. If I ever call him and he doesn't answer it, I'll take it back and he won't have a phone until he buys his own." And I said, "It's the same deal I'm going to make with you. If that phone rings and it's me on the line or your parents on the line, it better be answered." But where did he get that? I don't know. Somewhere, one of his 9-year-old friends chose not to answer the phone when his parents called. He didn't just make that up. Yeah, they do. But character, I think, is a key issue. And you mentioned ethics just a second. The origin of that comes from one of my favorite authors who wrote several years ago, a guy by the name of Aristotle. And he wrote a book called The Rhetoric, and where he talked about that somebody who's a good rhetorician would say, "It is a good man speaking well." Quintilian said the same thing. Aristotle said there's 3 ways you persuade people: ethos, pathos, and logos. And the very first one, and the more important one, was ethos, ethics. People believe you because of who you are. Pathos is the emotion, logos is the logic, and they're important. But the first one was ethics. People believe you because of who you are. Yes?
My youngest daughter, she was in elementary, I remember 2nd or 3rd grade, they had the bookstores and she had her own money and she was going to go buy a book from the bookstore. When she got there, there was this other book that had like a little necklace on it, and she didn't quite have enough money for that book to get the necklace with it. Well, next day, she's wearing a little necklace. We're like, "Where'd you get that?" And she owned up to it that she took it from the bookstore. So we made her write an apology letter to the bookkeeper at the bookstore and take it and return it and stand there in the bookstore and read the apology letter out loud to everybody for the fact that she stole that necklace from the bookstore. I hope somewhere along the way that made an imprint on her mind.
That probably was a significant moment in her life. You're exactly right. So developing our character. My point is that character and integrity are important. The first thing is character. That's developed by how close to the Word we get. How involved in God's Word we get. Let's look at the second one here. Summary, there we go. Character, integrity. Get this one done before we were finished. So integrity. What does integrity mean? If you say somebody's got integrity, what do you... Go ahead, go. Accountable, okay.
What?
Doing the right thing with what?
No matter what.
No matter what. I always define it as doing the right thing when nobody's looking. Doing the right thing when nobody's looking. Somebody asked me one time about running a business, and I said, you know, one of my greatest goals in running a business is when I get to the end of the time, which I got to last December. Not kind of semi-end, but I'm still doing some work. but when I get to the end of the time running my company, I want to say I can go back and work for any company I've worked for in the years, 30 years plus, that I ran that business. There's not a company I couldn't go back and work for. And that's that handshake that you were talking about earlier. I didn't have contracts. I had people I knew who wrote proposals and contracts, and I had to do that with a lot of government agencies I worked with because they required it. But if it was a mom and pop store or sizable manufacturing company that weren't government contractors, hey, here's what it costs. Shake hands, and I delivered it. Go ahead.
11 kind of speaks of the whole chapter.
Yeah.
The whole speaks of the integrity of God. David's speaking up here. You can trust in these things. He's saying all these different things about God. You can depend on it. You can trust. This is carried out through this whole chapter of 1:11.
Okay. Yeah, I think a lot of times trust is depending on reliability. If you know you can trust something because it operated in a certain way and it's going to operate that way tomorrow. I can trust you if you do what you say you're going to do, and tomorrow you're going to do what you say you're going to do. Consistent behavior over a period of time. Yes, sir.
I keep going back to 1 Corinthians 13 when it says, I look through a glass darkly, but not face to face. When you talk about a friend that you can reveal your life to, let's say, or trust your life to him. Well, when you're seeing yourself through that clear glass as others see you, then you can start making the corrections that need to be made.
Sure. Yeah. Now, one of the greatest assets of the training world, and at least in my opinion, is the opportunity that people have sometimes to hold up the mirror and take a look at themselves and say, what does my behavior look like to other people? And my assumption has always been, and I've always taught people, that if you can do that with competent individuals, they can make the changes. They can make the necessary changes to be more successful, to be more reliable, to exhibit the behaviors that they ought to exhibit to be, but you've got to give them that chance to reflect, because oftentimes we get behaving in certain ways and we don't stop and take that time to reflect. Yes?
I think everybody likes things to be in black and white, but the integrity portion is trying not to exploit the gray areas and justify what you've done in the gray area.
Where's that gray area concept come from? Is there a gray area in the Bible?
Well, in a lot of ways, I think, kind of go back to what Jack was saying in the beginning. Everybody talks about music in the church as far as, it clearly says to raise your voice, sing and make joyful noise. Nowhere does it say to strum your guitar, beat your drums, but nowhere does it say not to either. And it's a gray area.
Are there other things that you could be doing here this morning that it doesn't tell you not to do? They could have handed out cookies and ice cream for a communion. It doesn't tell you not to do that.
When I've talked to people about the differences between the Church of Christ and other churches, I flat tell them, I said, look, I'm not going to say you're sinning for having a guitar on stage. I'm not going to tell you that, but I'm going to tell you that I don't believe in it because I read where it says to raise your voice.
Tells you what to do.
That's all it says.
Yeah.
So I'm going to try to live by what it actually says. I'm not going to say that you're sinning going to hell because you have a guitar in your church, but at the same time, it doesn't say to do it.
That's true.
So,
Jack, you have.
One of the things I think in our day today, the deterioration of integrity has happened because we don't do simple things like saying no. We tend to overcommit and underdeliver, and that deteriorates our integrity. Do you see that?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, Chris.
It's not new, but I think our society extremely values situational ethics. And if you catch yourself when someone accuses you of something or challenges you with something, the first thing you do is either A, start coming up with justifications for why you did it and trying to justify yourself instead of like David, who when Nathan came and said what he did, he didn't start saying, well, I had a right to do this. Maybe her husband was bad. Maybe this was going on. Maybe that was going on. If you're justifying, if you're having to, because somebody stepped on your sore toe, you have to start justifying what you're doing, you probably ought to back off and think about it and see if that's really what you should be doing. And on so many of the political issues this day and time, people are doing things that they know in the purest sense are wrong, but they're justifying it. I don't want to, I could throw out lots of stuff, but I'm not wearing a mask because I don't like the guy that's telling me to wear a mask, or I'm wearing a mask, but I don't like the people that aren't wearing masks, or just all these things that we want to justify instead of trying to come together for a common cause. We're always finding a reason to be dividing ourselves and justifying our actions, even if we inherently know they're wrong.
Well, there's a lot of ministers who won't preach about sin anymore.
Right.
Somehow they just kind of get away from that. And people who feel like that's a old concept, that's not something that we really need to deal with. Yes?
You probably have encountered in your training experience a lot of people that just don't like to be taught anything. They don't like to acknowledge that they don't know anything.
They already know it.
Another simple phrase that people don't like to use is the term "I don't know." I tell people in my training experience in the past and also just in life in general, one of the most genuine character, or one of the most important characteristics is genuineness. And that involves an acknowledgement that I don't know everything, and I am vulnerable, and I do make mistakes. And we've sort of developed a mentality in our society that you've got to present this image of being somebody that is beyond, any imperfection. And I know everything. I already knew that. You can't tell me that because I already knew that.
Now, when I was teaching at university years ago, when I got into my training world, I never felt bad about saying I don't know. I'd say I don't know, but I'll find out and get back to you. And I always did that.
More damage when you pretend
Absolutely.
to know something or be something that you're not.
Make up stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, finish this up. Integrity, doing what's right when nobody's looking. And we're out of time. Where does that show itself? It shows it in our marriages, when we do our taxes this time of year, when you're at work and you take home a few work supplies because you need a pack of paper on your personal printer at home, when you exaggerate stuff, when you're talking to people. I was always pleased, and Prentice uses the example in this book on commitment of his father, who worked at the post office. He didn't have advanced degrees, but he worked at the post office all his life. But he became the confidant of Batsell Barrett Baxter. Batsell Barrett Baxter was a professor at Lipscomb and preached at the Hillsborough Church of Christ, probably one of the best preachers I ever heard, listened to. But he became the confidant of Brother Baxter. And they would sit in the backyard and talk for hours on end. Because Prentice Metter Sr. had that integrity. That was so important. If you've ever seen a movie, you watch those westerns. If the camera went up in the air and looked down, you'd see a lot of false fronts with little huts behind them. And I think a lot of lives are that way. We have a false front that we show the world, but behind that front, there's a lot of anxiety, a lot of frustration, a lot of questions, a lot of concerns, a lot of fears that's going on inside us. And you have to find ways to connect with other Christians to share those issues. Christ has to trust us to keep our promise to following Him all the way. So thank you for your comments today. Thank you for your questions. We'll continue this next week. We're a week behind, but the last week was just a summary anyway, so I think we're still going to be able to finish up May 29th. But